My name's Nick, and today I'm joined by Alicia, and we're going to talk about something a bit different today, I think. Instead of trying to inundate you guys with tips and tricks of how to survive the GAMSAT specifically and applying to med schools, we thought we'd talk a little bit about our own experiences on the way to getting into med school. And hopefully that's going to show you guys that we're actually humans as well. And we've spent a considerable amount of time in the exact same shoes that you guys are currently finding yourselves in, and that we can commiserate with the feeling, because I think for very few people, the GAMSAT is an enjoyable time. So we'll talk a bit about our experiences and what we went through along the way. I think one other thing about the GAMSAT too is it teaches you a lot about yourself. And I definitely learned a lot about myself and questioned many times why I was doing all this work and whether it was really what I wanted to do in the end. But being where I am now, I'm very glad that I persevered through with all the effort and got to where I am today. So hopefully you guys can take some details from this and some tips and tricks just broadly about the experience of sitting the GAMSAT from two people who have gotten through to the other side. And so I think this is a good time to introduce my co-host, Alicia. So I think what we'll do is we're going to start with the why today. So the why is going to be the driving factor for you guys ongoing and how you keep yourselves motivated, even in the face of a lot of adversity. So Alicia, if you don't mind introducing yourself briefly, and then just let us know what made you decide to start this long journey of trying to get into medicine.
Yeah, definitely. I think that my journey is typical in some ways, but also not in other ways. So I always had medicine in the back of my mind going through school, but I was never quite decided on it. I actually wanted to be a movie director for quite a while I was growing up, because I loved film and I actually loved being creative. And I found that job in particular was able to incorporate my creative side, but also the organizational and aspects of directing and production. And so during high school, I had that in the back of my mind, but then I also developed a love for maths and science. And I kind of decided that I wanted to incorporate maths and science into my career as I went further through high school. And so that kind of led me to the end of grade 12, where I was really torn between medicine or finance, because I actually loved numbers. I could see myself working with numbers for the rest of my life. And I think the biggest deciding factor was the hands-on aspect of medicine. I'm a person that always needs to be up doing things, getting involved and doing things with my hands, communicating with people. And I saw that a lot more in a medicine career rather than a finance career. And I also felt like I needed to be in a space where I could make a tangible difference. I know that sounds really cheesy, but I genuinely wanted to do something that would help others and that would allow me to develop meaningful relationships with other people. And I think that that's something that's often lacking in the finance industry. So yeah, that's how I ended up doing medicine. And I'm so glad I chose it, because I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah, awesome.
And what about you,
very
Nick?
Similar to many
How
other
did you,
people.
yeah.
I think medicine is a windy road for a lot of different people. So it's interesting that you started out in such a far left thing and kind of came back around to it. But I think, somewhat similarly, but I maybe took a little bit longer to get there. But I came around to the idea of medicine a bit late. So I kind of always had it in the back of my mind as, this kind of nice career that looked nice on paper and kind of ticked all the boxes that I wanted for work. But I pursued an undergraduate degree in Spanish, because I wanted to be able to travel in my career. And so for me, that afforded that ability. And I graduated in the US, so Spanish is actually a lot more viable there than here. And after I graduated, I moved to Australia shortly afterwards. And given that Spanish isn't super common here, I had to kind of work around and find a few odd jobs here and there because my degree didn't really apply much. So I worked in gyms for quite a while, but really found that I wasn't able to have the impact or the workplace satisfaction that I really wanted. for me in my life, kind of, I like to look for three things, I guess, out of a career. And one of them is really enjoying what I do. That's probably the most important one. Another one is how people perceive that career, because I think it's important to have some type of prestige with what you do because it gives you satisfaction. And the other thing is being able to earn a livable income. And I think very few of those boxes were actually ticked by doing personal training and managing of gyms. So I kind of decided to try and sit the GAMSAT because, again, I saw medicine as this kind of thing that ticked all of those boxes and felt, kind of perfect for me as far as what I wanted to do with my life. And as I was sitting the GAMSAT or getting ready to, I applied for a base level pharmacy job at the Women's and Children's Hospital here in Adelaide, hoping that would give me a bit of exposure so that I actually worked in the hospital and had a bit of an idea of what it would entail rather than just kind of diving in and being like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. And after working in the pharmacy for a year, I knew I wanted to have more of an impact in the hospital because I was just doing pharmacy tech work. And not just doing that, obviously, pharmacy tech is a really quite substantial job that takes a lot of effort and brain power day to day. But I wanted to have more control over patient management, themselves, so that I could actually make decisions about patient care. I could, do some research on my own and kind of push the field of medicine and patient care a bit further. And I think much like Alicia said, at the bottom of it, even though it's probably not a great response for an interview question because it's what everyone says, but I did want to help people too. I wanted to have a positive impact on people's lives, and I wanted to be able to improve patient care as much as possible. So I guess, that harkens back. We both have our why and how we kind of decided on the idea of medicine. And again, I think it's really important to keep that in the back of your head, because if you don't have a good why, you're not going to find it very easy to push through the hard times. Because I can guarantee if sitting through the GAMSAT right now is hard, which it probably is for a majority of people, there's a lot of obstacles that are going to be coming up in the next few years once you get through. It doesn't stop once you get that perfect score on the GAMSAT. There's going to be a lot of other crossroads and obstacles to get over. So now that we've gone through the why, I think we should probably tell you a bit more about how we actually got where we are. So Alicia, why don't we start with you by talking about your experience just broadly about preparing and actually sitting the GAMSAT, because I think that'll be a bit more relevant for where people are right now.
Yeah, sure. I think what you said is really true. Like, if you don't have a good reason why you want to do med school, it makes it really hard, especially if you don't get GAMSAT in the first couple of tries, to keep on going. And I personally know quite a lot of people who have just given up on med or realized that that's not really what they want to do because they've tried a couple times and they've just realized it's not worth the effort for them. And so I think, if anything, the GAMSAT is a bit of a filter for those types of people. So in terms of actually sitting the GAMSAT, I sat the GAMSAT twice in total, both in my second year of undergrad. And I started studying about mid-November. So once uni ended for the year, at the end of first year, I started studying for the March exam. And I was studying about 4 hours a day consistently throughout the summer holidays, which was about 3 months. And I had a pretty solid foundation in biology because I was doing an undergrad degree in biomedical science. But I found that I had forgotten a lot of chemistry and a lot of physics. So that was definitely my focus in section 3. But I didn't actually spend that much time at all learning content, because for me anyway, I found the best way was to learn by doing practice questions. So I would do the questions, and if I came across a particular topic over and over again that I wasn't familiar with, then I would sit down and give myself a little bit of time to go over that topic. But I didn't physically spend a lot of time just learning science. For me, I focused most of my energy on sections 1 and 2 because I knew they would be my weakest section. So I made sure I read through all my essays, I had them critiqued by others, I read a lot of books, and actively tried to speed up my reading because that was a big issue for me. And that's the main study that I did for the exam itself. In the month leading up to the GAMSAT, I actually didn't do much study at all because I didn't want to stress myself out. I also wanted to focus on uni once uni started up again to keep my GPA up as high as I could. So after taking the GAMSAT for the first time, I remember walking out of that room feeling exhausted. Like, I don't think my brain was working anymore. And I had no idea how it went. I didn't think that I did amazingly, but I kind of just blocked it out of my mind because I didn't see any point stressing out about it. And I actually ended up doing quite well. So technically, I didn't have to sit it a second time, but I felt like I should just because I had the resources and the ability to. And, you know, even though I had a good score, any point higher could be that difference between me getting in and not getting in. So I thought I may as well try a second time. And I actually found the September one even harder than the March exam. And I was sure that I had bombed the exam, but I actually ended up getting 1 mark higher. So was it worth it? I don't know. But what about you, Nick? What was your experience like?
Yeah, well, I think we all sit the GAMSAT and ask, was it worth it once it's all over? But yeah, so broadly from my experience when
Yeah.
I was doing it, so I was working full time at a gym when I sat the GAMSAT, and probably about 4 months before the actual exam. So if we're sitting at end of March, I was probably looking around end of November. I really kind of started properly studying, knowing that I kind of wanted to sit the GAMSAT. I'd done a bit here and there, but not much. And I'd been out of school for probably about 4 years at that stage and had done no biology or chemistry for about 8 years. So I had quite a bit of groundwork to make up. Um, I think a bit unlike Alicia, I studied more content than practice questions. And I think I was more comfortable with the setup of the questions on the exam because I have a strong physics background and not so much chemistry and biology. And all of the exams that I did throughout my undergraduate degree in physics are word problems. They're long stems, they're blocks of information, they're graphs, they're charts. You have to decide the correct answer based on that. So I actually had a pretty strong background with that, but a lot less so with the content. So I really just studied content for about 3 of the 4 months, pretty hard. And that's what I did with 90% of my study time. In the final month, I did a fair bit of practice questions and tapered off, so I wasn't completely gassed on the day of the exam. So I did still do a few practice questions because I think it's important to get in the mindset of, you're training your brain how to read them. So even though I'd done that prior, I hadn't been in practice for those 4 years that I was out of school for. So it's definitely worth doing that again, even if you feel confident. I was fortunate enough to only have to sit the exam that once, but I didn't think that was going to be the case. I remember very clearly I was walking out of that crammed building. So I'm sure for those of you that sat the exam in person before, you know the feeling. You've just put your pen down after they call time. You kind of take a bit of, awareness of what's just happened around you. You look around and everyone's got head in hands and everyone just looks so sad. And I just felt like I'd been dragged through the mud for the last 7 hours. And I couldn't think of anything other than crawling back into bed and just pretending like the whole thing had never happened. And I think what made it worse for me is as we were walking out of the building once the exam had finished, there was a group of people in front of me, and I'm not sure if they knew each other, if they made friends on the day, but they were just talking candidly and having an absolute laugh about the exam and questions that they'd answered and talking about, oh yeah, how'd you do this one? And oh, what'd you do on that one? And they just made it sound like it was just this super simple exam. And I felt like I'd completely bombed it. And I was just so dejected by that. And it just really made me feel sick. So I put headphones in, blocked them out. And I think all I did that night was I sat down on the couch, I had a big bowl of popcorn, and I watched some terrible comedy either on TV or Netflix and proceeded to go straight to bed to start 2 months of waiting until the results came out. So I don't know if that's encouraging for you guys, but I don't know that either of us really felt, confident as we left the exam hall. I think, we weren't happy about the results, but it does show that it's a bit of a mind game. You've just had an exam for what was 7 hours, what will now be, I believe, around 5.5 hours of exam time. So it's natural to be exhausted tired, feeling like a wreck, and just generally being a bit sad. But I think we'll probably talk a little bit about, I guess, how we each dealt with those feelings in the interim. And I think just to, I guess, move on from that a bit, the most important thing after you study is knowing that the exam's done and now you've got a few months to wait. So I think we had a bit of a difference in how we handled our wait times. I'll talk about mine first, I guess. But I think broadly that finding out about your results is like a really good example of a where were you when moment. I think a lot of people, like the where were you when moments for a lot of people. So like for me in the US, and not to equate GAMSAT results to this, that's not the same in any way, but just so people understand what I'm saying, everyone knows where you were when you found out about 9/11. Everyone knows where you were when you found out about the Princess Diana car crash, that type of stuff. For me, I feel like finding out about GAMSAT results, you know exactly the moment you found them, you know exactly the moment you got the text or the email or whatever it was saying that results were out. And I remember super clearly that I actually got a text that results were out while I was at work at the gym. And just immediately my heart started pounding in my chest. And I hadn't even looked at my results yet. I hadn't asked anyone how they did. I hadn't talked to anyone. And just as soon as I saw they were out, my stomach just dropped. So it was a bit less than ideal. And I was in the middle of my workday at the gym and I just put everything down immediately because I couldn't focus on anything. And it was also made 100 times worse by the fact that because I'm not from Australia and I'd never sat the GAMSAT before and I didn't really understand the marking system, I had no idea what a competitive GAMSAT score was. And so I looked at my score in the end and I had no idea if I'd done well or not. And I was just kind of like, well, okay, I've got a score like, I don't know if it's competitive. I'm probably going to have to sit it again based on the fact that I know that I don't feel good about how I did. And it wasn't actually until I called my partner and kind of dejectedly said, oh yeah, like this is how I did in section 1, section 2, section 3. This is my overall score. And she was like, wow, that's actually like quite competitive for medical schools. Like you could be in a good place here. And I was just actually completely shocked and I nearly fainted. I couldn't actually believe it. So yeah, it's a very odd process finding out about the results, and it's almost as terrifying as sitting the exam itself. Did you have a similar feeling, Alicia? How did you find out about your results?
Yeah. Well, funny you say that actually, because when we were writing the script, I thought so hard about where I was when I found my results, and I couldn't for the life of me remember where I was or what I was doing. I guess it was different because I sat it twice. So I remember where I was the second time when I opened my September result, but I have no recollection. I don't know how or why. I even asked all my friends and none of them remember, which is crazy, but I must have been just at home because I'm sure if I was out doing something, I would have remembered. But I think for both of the exams that I sat, I had done some deep digging on the internet to find an approximate date of when the results would be out. So I kind of had an idea of which day they would come out. So that I do remember having that in the back of my mind and kind of just refreshing my email all day, waiting for that message to come through. But I didn't tell anyone that I knew the date. So I was just by myself nervously refreshing. And I remember receiving the email and my hands were shaking. I couldn't log into my account. And just navigating the page to the results is like the most stressful 10 seconds of your life. But I do remember opening the results and just being completely shocked because I didn't think I did well at all. And so I kind of looked, they give you a curve, a grading curve, and it was pretty high up there. And I just thought to myself, wow, like that's actually competitive. I could get in somewhere with that score. But yeah, September was similar, except when the results came out, it was actually in study week, just before final exams at the end of the year. And it was different because it came out quite late in the afternoon. So I wasted an entire day. I couldn't study, I couldn't concentrate. All I could do was just keep refreshing my emails. Um, and I wasn't as nervous that time because I knew I already had a good score under my belt. But when I found out I got a mark higher, I was even more shocked, because I had done almost no preparation for the second exam. So, and I had found it way harder. So I did not expect to do better at all in the second time, um, sitting the gamsat. So that's kind of my experience, a bit different from yours, funnily enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you
And
want to
I think
keep
everyone will
going
kind
from
of
there,
have
Nick?
different experiences. But yeah, absolutely. I think we'll keep tracking on from there. So just to kind of, I guess, talk a little bit more then. So we've got our scores. And I guess for me, it was all pretty much a whirlwind from there. I had to quickly kind of decide where I was going to apply, decide on preferences for GemSAS, put in applications, contact referees, write up portfolios, and everything else. And again, not being from here, not being used to the application process for Australia, and honestly not knowing hardly anything about the medical schools, so not really knowing what to prefer, as far as my application went, specifically with GemSAS, I was kind of a bit lost and felt like there was this massive mountain of effort now in front of me. But I do want to say one piece of advice for me that I strongly recommend for those of you that will be doing the same application process this upcoming year, is to complete all of your application materials well and truly before the deadline. Do not wait until the last minute, because I remember I was on my way back from visiting my family in the US, and I was connected to dodgy airport internet waiting for our flight to be boarded. And I only had an Australian phone. So at that stage, I had no wireless internet connection. So all I had to rely on was the airport internet. And I got an email saying that my application required an official transcript from my university in the US, postmarked by close of business that day. And we were about to get on a 15-hour flight across the ocean. So that wasn't really going to be a simple task for me. So I had to call family in the US. I had to call family in Australia and try to orchestrate everything over the phone to get it sent through on time. And it was just the worst experience of my life, because basically as soon as I sent messages to everyone and kind of got confirmation that they'd seen them, we were boarding the plane. And so I had no confirmation that anything had actually happened. It did get out. And luckily I ended up interviewing at both Deakin and Flinders. So I did the MMI and panel interview respectively. And honestly, both were equally as daunting, but in their own special way. Obviously, MMI, multiple stations, quick kind of rapid fire speed dating type, and panel interview, long sit down chat with 3 people or 2 people or however many are on your panel. And they continue to fire questions at you again and again. And obviously we can't say too much about the actual interview process based on the confidentiality agreements that we sign. But one more thing, I guess, generally about my journey. So because I ended up getting accepted to Deakin and I was waitlisted at Flinders and I'm from Adelaide, it was actually looking likely at the start that I was going to uproot my life and head to Geelong for 4 years, which I was very, very happy with. I was excited. I've heard a lot of good things about Geelong. But again, it meant uprooting my life, and my partner had a job here in Adelaide for the next year, so she couldn't move with me. So I was going to be doing it alone, living on campus, learning a new place. So that was kind of a bit daunting for me. But luckily, after about a month of waiting, I was emailed and found out that I had a spot at Flinders and accepted that. So that's where I am now. But I think just the general idea behind that for me is that even waitlisted isn't necessarily a no. And you can get that email at absolutely any time, right up until the day before classes start. And the other thing is regardless of what happens throughout the process, if you get in, you should chase your dream wherever that ends up being or wherever it will take you, because honestly, the experience is going to be amazing regardless. And I don't think most people would be able to live with themselves with kind of that what if hanging over their heads if you did end up turning down a school just because it was in another state or just because moving felt a bit too hard. I think definitely follow your dreams. And if you decide 6 months in that you can't do it and it's not for you, you can pull the pin at that stage. But yeah, I don't think that what if is ever going to be a comfortable thing for anyone to feel. So yeah, obviously never write yourselves off, of being out of the count, and just, chase your dream wherever you can. Alicia, what was your experience with the whole application process and the interview and finding out results?
Yeah, I guess mine was similar to yours in some ways. I applied through GemSAS as well, and I also applied to the University of Sydney, or USyd, because they have a completely separate application process. One of the reasons I chose to apply for USyd was because their interviews were held much earlier in the year compared to GemSAS, and I thought that if I did get an interview offer, that would be a really good practice run for the MMIs for GemSAS. Um, so I didn't actually apply to any schools that required a portfolio at all. So applications were quite simple for me. It was just ticking boxes, filling out forms online. The biggest thing for me was I was actually on exchange in Canada the semester that applications were due. So I just had to make sure that I didn't forget about them while I was out having fun on exchange and making sure that I completed all the forms on time. I also had to get official transcripts from my exchange studies sent to GemSAS and to USyd. And so I just had to make sure that I applied for those early enough so that they had time to be sent to Australia, and then I had to send them off in the mail to Sydney and Melbourne and GemSAS and everything like that. So I ended up getting an interview offer to USyd, and I did a lot of MMI practice beforehand. And I had to fly to Sydney for the interview, and it was just super nerve-wracking being in a completely different location, different environment. It was the first interview I'd ever done, and I actually had considered going to USyd because it's a very good medical school, and I have family in Sydney, so it wouldn't be completely horrible if I had to move down there. And the interview was at the very end of July, which is quite early compared to GemSAS. And I came out of it actually feeling like I did quite well. So it was quite reassuring for me. And I found out about 3 weeks later that I had been offered a non-bonded spot. And so that was a giant weight off my shoulders when it came to GemSAS, because I knew I already had a spot at a medical school before the interview offers even came out, whereas a lot of friends that I had applying was kind of still nervous and thinking about it all the way till the end of the year pretty much. So I got an interview offer to UQ in September, which was my first preference in GemSAS because I live in Brisbane. So the interview process ended up being really similar to USyd. So I'm really grateful that I had that experience beforehand. And I ended up getting into UQ, which worked better for me because then I wouldn't have to move to Sydney, pay for rent, bills, everything like that. So I ended up declining my offer at Sydney and accepted my UQ offer. So that's how I ended up where I am today. And yeah, 1 year in, still going strong. Yeah, so kind of similar to your experience, but I think I had that spot kind of secured for me before GemSAS. So I had it very, very lucky in that I wasn't as stressed about the whole GemSAS process towards the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's kind of a good tactic to take, to know that, you're going to apply to schools. Yes, there's an application fee, but it's worth just paying that extra money and sitting the interview, even if it's a flight to a random city. It might be a night hotel stay or whatever it is. I did the same thing when I went to Deakin. So I was still working, so I flew into Melbourne. I rented a car. I drove to Geelong that night. I stayed at an Airbnb and then interviewed the next morning, and then did the opposite that next night. So drove back and flew back. But it's worth it. You get the experience before
Yeah,
you maybe sit the interview for the school that you really want. And again, it's just opening the opportunity for you to get in as many places as possible, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you get in. As long as you get in, that's kind of, I think, what everyone's final goal is at the end. So hopefully that kind of gives you guys a bit of an
definitely.
insight into
Yeah,
our process, and shows kind of broadly what we've sat through all the same stresses that you guys are currently experiencing. A little bit of a shorter episode probably this time, just to kind of broadly give you an idea of what we went through, and hopefully you can see that we're human and we can very strongly commiserate with exactly where you guys are at the minute. we've put in the time and hopefully kind of shown that the other side is not without its special challenges, but it is something that's possible, especially if you put the time and effort in. And from my perspective, I just encourage you guys to take everything one step at a time. I would be, if I was sitting the GAMSAT in March, I would be focusing on GAMSAT prep now. Everything else can kind of wait till down the line. Then obviously once you've sat the GAMSAT, think about your applications. Make sure you start having your materials, your official transcripts, all that stuff on hand. Once you've applied, focus on interview prep. Start doing a few mock interviews with family, friends, all that type of stuff. And then once you've done your interview, focus on what you're going to do when you get the news, whether it's positive or negative. Plan a party, plan a get-together, if you will. And obviously give yourself a well-deserved break regardless of the outcome. So when you do find out, make sure you give yourself some time off, whether that's finding out your results from GAMSAT, whether it's finding out your interview results. Just take some time off here and there. And, I think each step of the process, once you've sat the GAMSAT, give yourself a week to just cool off, because it is a long process and you will burn out if you keep going. So celebrate the small wins, even if it's purely the fact that you made it through the GAMSAT, not necessarily gotten a good score, but just the fact that you survived the day. That's kind of a good pat on the back, with the fact that mountain has been climbed. Even if you didn't get a PB on the day, you can always go back and climb it another day, but take some time off and then go back to it when you're feeling refreshed. I think we're going to kind of tie everything up there. We just wanted to kind of show you guys that, we're not just talking out of a script that, tells us what to say to you guys and tells us, how we should kind of convince you to do the best. We have been through the process and we've tried and trialed various different things to try to get here. So, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight. Do you have any parting words before we kind of sign off here, Alicia?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said, Nick. Like, definitely take it one step at a time. I remember I didn't even think about applications while I was studying for the GAMSAT. And, even during the application process, I took it one step at a time, didn't think about what could or couldn't happen in the future, because that's just putting extra stress on yourself. That's just so unnecessary. Another thing you said before really stuck with me about how, don't count your failures as failures straight away, because as you said, like, if you're a waitlist, that's not a no. Take that as a win, because I know a lot of people who got really last minute offers. I have a really good friend actually that got an offer the Friday before orientation begun on Monday, and he quit his job that day, drove up from Sydney a day later, and started uni with us on the Monday in Brisbane. So it's definitely not, a no until it's really the end. So I guess don't get your hopes up, but also don't give up hope is what I'm trying to say. And same with the GAMSAT. I had people who did okay on the GAMSAT and they all asked me if they should apply. And I just told all of them, like, if they have the resources and the ability to, definitely, because you never know what the schools are looking for. If you apply for a school that has a portfolio, your portfolio could match exactly what they're looking for in a student, and they may be willing to accept a lower GAMSAT score. So just never discount yourself without trying in this whole process. Another thing I found very useful was to not expect anything from the process. So I found that I came to terms with failure in this journey, really, because, coming from a high achieving background, as most people in med school are, I feel like being prepared for failure and being able to come back from failure is a really big part of this journey. Preparing yourself, and as Nick said, like, even if you fail, still take time for yourself, still be able to celebrate even getting through the process, and just come back stronger than ever the next year, ready to try again. It's quite rare that someone can really get into med school without any failure. So learning to be tough and kind of taking your failures, or not taking your failures personally, I think is a really good skill to develop that will help you through the process. One last thing, I think also just forgetting about things once they're done. I know that's way easier said than done, but once you've sat the GAMSAT, try as best as you can to forget about it. I found, put that energy into something that you can control. Put it into studying for your uni exams, for getting more work experience, for putting more time into volunteering, something that will actually help your application even further, rather than just stressing about what may or may not be. I think that's the biggest thing, concentrating on the things that I could control and really learning to let go of those that I couldn't, really helped me to get through that whole journey. So that's all from me for today. I think that's all we kind of had planned, but we hope that it gave you some insight into the application process. And I think it really demonstrates today, how different the journey can be for different people and how different aspects of the process can stand out for different individuals, as you've seen between Nick and I. And the importance that we placed on certain, events that have happened throughout the process. So, anything else to add before we wrap up, Nick?
I don't think so. I think that kind of ties a nice bow on everything. And yeah, just understand that everyone's journey is going to be completely different. And no matter what you travel or where you go, you headed towards the same end goal. So feed off of other people, but also know what works for you, and know that you're on your own journey that hopefully will get you to the other line on the other side. So otherwise, good luck with the next few months of study, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.
Bye.